What if the Earth is not as silent as we thought? There are moments when the ground beneath our feet reminds us that we live on a restless planet. Moments when cities vanish in seconds, oceans rush inland, mountains tremble, and all we can do is pray we survive. But here's the question. What causes these sudden bursts of destruction? What triggers an earthquake deep beneath the earth where no human has ever gone? And what about the lights in the sky, the strange cloud formations, the animals acting wild, just before everything shakes? Today, we dive into some of the most terrifying earthquake mysteries that science still can't fully explain. Not just surface-level tremors, but seismic phenomena that defy the very laws of geology. From hidden fault zones to lights that flash before disaster, from ancient prophecies to forces strong enough to tilt the Earth's axis. This video will take you deeper than you've ever gone before, because what happens beneath our feet may be far stranger than anything we've imagined. Welcome to 100K Whys, where we don't just ask what happened, we ask why. Most people think of earthquakes as cracks at the surface, plates shifting, buildings shaking, roads splitting apart. But the truth is far more unsettling, because some earthquakes don't come from the surface. They come from deep within the earth, so deep that the very rocks behave differently. We call them deep focus earthquakes, and they begin more than 300 kilometers underground. At that depth, the pressure is unimaginable. We're talking about 5 gigapascals. That's over 49 million times the pressure at sea level. Under that much force, rocks shouldn't be able to break. The theory of brittle fracture, the one that explains most shallow earthquakes, simply doesn't work here. So why do they happen? For decades, geologists were baffled. How could a solid mass of hot, compressed rock, buried hundreds of kilometers deep, suddenly snap? Then came a breakthrough. Scientists began simulating these intense conditions in laboratories, and what they discovered was something chilling. A mineral called olivine, found deep in the Earth's mantle, begins to transform under pressure. It shifts into another form, spinel, in a sudden, violent process. But here's the key. This transformation causes fractures, cracks, bursts of energy, seismic waves, just like an earthquake. It's called transformation-induced faulting, and it may explain how these deep earthquakes are born. Not from slipping tectonic plates, but from rocks changing form, snapping as they become something else. Think about that. A rock, under pressure for millions of years, suddenly changes its structure, and in doing so releases energy equivalent to thousands of nuclear bombs, all without warning, all without a single human on Earth feeling a thing until it's too late. But the mystery doesn't stop there. Some deep-focus earthquakes occur in regions with no active subduction zones, no tectonic movement, no obvious cause, and some of them trigger massive tsunamis, even when their epicenters are far below the ocean floor. Are we missing something? Is it possible that Earth holds entire fault systems we've never detected, buried too deep for current sensors? Could there be ancient structures, or even vast underground cavities, collapsing under immense weight? Or is there another force, one we don't yet understand? Some geophysicists now suggest that phase changes in deep earth minerals could be more dynamic, even unstable, than we ever imagined. They may form chains of reaction like dominoes that ripple through the mantle, one shift triggering another, until the entire region snaps like a hidden pulse beneath our world. If this is true, then the earth beneath our feet is not solid. It's alive, evolving, cracking and reshaping itself in silence, until one day it decides to remind us who's really in charge. In the next chapter, we go from the unseen to the inexplicable. Because what if, before the earth shakes, the sky lights up? Tsunamis, the silent monsters of the deep. They don't roar like thunder. They don't come with warning sirens. They rise in silence. Then they strike. Tsunamis are some of the most devastating forces on Earth. Walls of water, hundreds of kilometers wide, moving faster than a jet plane, not crashing down like typical waves, but lifting the entire ocean and dragging it onto land. We often imagine tsunamis as rare events, triggered only by large, shallow earthquakes under the ocean. And while that's often true, it's not the full story, because new research is revealing something far more complex and far more terrifying. In 2018, scientists detected a strange seismic signal. It lasted for 9 days. It didn't fit the pattern of any known earthquake. No major tremor, no explosion, just a slow, humming pulse that seemed to echo across the planet. When they traced it, they found the cause. A mega tsunami, triggered not by an earthquake but by a massive underwater landslide. The ocean floor had collapsed. A deep scar was torn into the crust, and from that gash a wave was born. This wasn't just an isolated event. It opened a new door into an old fear, that tsunamis may be more unpredictable than we thought, because they don't always need a quake. Sometimes it takes nothing more than a landslide, a volcanic collapse, or something even stranger. Animal earthquake prediction, the forgotten sixth sense. Long before seismic sensors, long before satellite monitoring, there were the animals. For thousands of years, humans noticed something strange. Moments before the ground shook, animals behaved oddly. Dogs howled and ran in circles. Birds flew erratically. Horses panicked for no reason. And deep in the forests, even ants would flee their nests in perfect unison. The ancient Greeks wrote about it. So did the Chinese, the Persians, and the Japanese. Even Aristotle recorded cases of snakes and rats fleeing a city before an earthquake struck. But here's the question. What were they sensing? Today, science is trying to catch up with folklore, because story after story from every continent hints at a hidden truth, that animals somehow can sense earthquakes before they happen. In 1975, the Chinese city of Haicheng was evacuated based largely on animal behavior. Snakes emerged from their winter holes in the middle of freezing temperatures. Dogs barked uncontrollably. Cattle refused to enter barns. Authorities took the risk and evacuated over 100,000 people. Just days later, a powerful earthquake hit. Thousands of buildings collapsed. But the death toll was far lower than it could have been. Coincidence or something more? One theory is that animals detect P waves. The first, silent wave of an earthquake that humans cannot feel. Another suggests they can sense electromagnetic shifts underground. Some researchers believe they respond to changes in air ionization or low-frequency vibrations, similar to infrasound. In other words, a frequency below human hearing, but not beyond the ears of a dog or the sensitivity of a bird. But there's a deeper question. Could animals possess a kind of biological early warning system? A sixth sense that we, as humans, once had but lost through evolution? Many indigenous cultures believe so. They see animals not as lesser beings but as messengers, guardians attuned to the earth's voice. And when the earth prepares to move, these guardians react. In Sri Lanka, during the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, Hundreds of people perished, but wildlife experts were shocked to find that most animals, elephants, deer, monkeys, had already fled inland. Very few animal carcasses were found. The creatures had disappeared hours before the first wave arrived. How did they know? Science still has no definitive answer. Attempts to use animals as prediction tools have failed in controlled environments. Because unlike machines, animals are not predictable. They are emotional, instinctual, alive. But maybe that's the point. What if our obsession with instruments and data has blinded us to a more intuitive truth? That nature itself has built-in warning systems, we just stopped listening. Imagine a world where earthquake prediction isn't only high-tech, but also low-tech, watching the skies, listening to the forest, noticing when the dogs go silent. This isn't fantasy, it's survival. Because when the ground begins to speak, not everyone hears it, but some creatures still do. In the next chapter, we turn to the sea, because what happens beneath the ocean can be just as deadly and even harder to see, especially when the wave has no warning at all. Hidden earthquakes, the ones we never knew happened. What if the earth has been shaking but we never noticed? What if beneath our very feet thousands of earthquakes have already happened and no one ever felt a thing? For decades, scientists believed they had a good picture of seismic activity around the world. Major faults, active zones, subduction areas, all mapped, all monitored, or so we thought. Then came artificial intelligence. New machine learning tools were trained on massive seismic datasets, and what they uncovered shocked the entire scientific community. In Yellowstone National Park, a region already known for its geothermal activity, AI analysis revealed something unexpected. Over 86,000 earthquakes had occurred, most of them previously undetected. They weren't large. They didn't make the news, but they were there, happening quietly beneath the surface, day after day, year after year. These are called micro-quakes, movements so small they don't trigger traditional sensors, but when analyzed together they paint a much bigger picture. A system under pressure, a fault line breathing, sometimes a supervolcano stirring. The mystery isn't just about the number, it's about what else we've missed. Because if tens of thousands of quakes can hide beneath Yellowstone, how many more are hiding elsewhere? In California, AI has identified seismic clusters with no clear origin. In Oklahoma, thousands of small quakes were traced back to underground wastewater injection. And in the deep ocean, sensors have picked up long, slow vibrations, unlike anything we've seen before. They don't fit the standard model of tectonic movement. They don't radiate like normal quakes. They don't follow the rules. We call them slow earthquakes. Some last for hours, some for weeks. They release energy gradually, like a breath being exhaled from the earth. And the strangest part, they sometimes come before major disasters. But even beyond that, there are silent zones, places with no seismic activity at all. On paper, they look safe. But some scientists fear these zones may actually be locked, building pressure, waiting, until one day they snap, releasing energy all at once. So here's the chilling thought. The Earth is not still. It never was. We just haven't been listening carefully enough. With AI, we're beginning to hear its whispers, to map the movements of its hidden pulse. But the more we uncover, the more we realize how much we still don't know. What other movements lie beneath us? What patterns have gone unnoticed for centuries? What invisible countdown is already underway, ticking quietly, deep inside the crust? In the next part, we'll explore what happens when the Earth doesn't just shake. It moves. It shifts the land, it tilts the planet, and it even changes time itself. Media tsunamis, for instance, are generated by atmospheric pressure waves, not earthquakes, not tectonics, just a sudden change in air pressure like a fast-moving storm transferring energy into the sea. The result? A tsunami that appears out of nowhere, sometimes indistinguishable from a storm surge. Other times, a rogue wave that flattens everything in its path. Most coastal cities don't have systems to detect these, because they are not caused by traditional seismic activity, which means millions of people live in areas where a tsunami could strike without any tremor at all. And then, there's the possibility that haunts every geologist, the potential for a massive collapse in Antarctica. As the ice melts, as the land beneath it becomes unstable, an enormous shelf could give way. The resulting displacement of water wouldn't just cause flooding, it could send tsunamis rippling across oceans, not in hours but in minutes. This is no longer a far-fetched theory. It's part of the new reality. As the climate warms, as sea levels rise, as the planet's balance shifts, our understanding of danger must also evolve. Because the scariest tsunami isn't the one you see, it's the one you never expect, the one that doesn't follow rules, the one that begins with a whisper beneath the waves and ends in silence on land. In the next part, we'll dive into a new kind of danger, not from the surface, not from the sky, but from beneath our very feet, where entire swarms of earthquakes are hiding in plain sight. Earth axis shifts when earthquakes move the world. Some earthquakes don't just rattle windows, they don't just break roads or topple buildings, they move entire continents, and sometimes they move the planet itself. On March 11, 2011, a massive earthquake struck off the coast of Japan. It was one of the most powerful in recorded history, a magnitude 9.1. It triggered a devastating tsunami, destroyed towns, melted a nuclear plant. But something even more disturbing happened. Something invisible, something cosmic. The force of the earthquake caused Japan's main island, Honshu, to shift 4 meters to the east. Imagine an entire landmass moving, not inches but meters, in seconds. But that wasn't the end of it. NASA scientists soon confirmed that the earthquake had actually tilted the Earth's axis. Not by much. Just about 10 centimeters or possibly even 25 centimeters, according to other estimates. But that tiny tilt changed everything, because the Earth's axis isn't just a line, it's the spine of our world. It defines how we spin, how we experience time, how the sun rises and the seasons flow. By shifting the axis, the earthquake slightly altered the Earth's rotation speed. The result? A day became shorter by 1.8 microseconds. It sounds small, but it proves something astonishing, that a single event on Earth can change the rhythm of the entire planet. This wasn't the first time. In 2004, the massive Sumatra earthquake also tilted the axis and shortened the day. And in 1960, the Great Chilean earthquake, the most powerful ever recorded, had a similar effect. Each time the Earth shakes at that scale, the mass distribution of the planet changes. It's like spinning a figure skater. Pull in the arms and they spin faster. Shift mass on a planet and the rotation adjusts. But what does this really mean? It means that tectonic energy doesn't just affect the ground, it affects space and time. It rewrites global GPS data. It requires recalibration of satellites. It changes how we map the stars. And perhaps most disturbingly, it shows how fragile our sense of stability truly is. The axis of the Earth is not fixed. It wobbles, it drifts. and sometimes it jumps, all because of forces deep below the crust, forces we still barely understand. Could a future earthquake shift the axis even further? Could it disrupt weather patterns, cause chain reactions in ocean currents, or even make regions uninhabitable over time? We don't know. But one thing is certain: the Earth is not just a planet. It is a dynamic system of movement, rotation, and balance. And when that balance is broken, even slightly, the effects ripple through everything we know. In the next part, we'll explore something even stranger. What if the Earth warns us before it moves? Not with tremors, but with light, with sound, with visions in the sky and ancient prophecies remembered only in whispers, prophetic phenomena when the sky warns the Earth will move. What if the Earth doesn't shake in silence? What if before disaster strikes, the sky speaks? Throughout history, unusual phenomena have appeared before massive earthquakes: lights in the clouds, flashes on the horizon, glowing orbs hovering in the air, and sometimes even visions. They are called earthquake lights or echo, mysterious bursts of light that appear days, hours, or even moments before the ground begins to move. They come in many forms: blue flashes, floating spheres, pillars of glowing air, and sometimes strange fire-like clouds twisting through the sky. Modern scientists have tried to explain them. Some point to piezoelectric effects, the idea that stress in rocks generates electric charges. Others propose triboluminescence, or the release of light when materials are fractured. Still others suggest electromagnetic anomalies, frictional vaporization, or ionized plasma. But none of these theories fully explain what's seen. Not the colors, not the shapes, not the timing, because these lights don't always appear above fault zones, they don't always follow the rules, and they sometimes resemble ancient descriptions of omens. Take January 2025. In Beijing, witnesses reported something shocking. 7 suns appeared in the sky, not in a dream, not in folklore, but in real time. Multiple orbs of light surrounding the true sun floating in an arc across the cold morning air. It made headlines, it sparked confusion. And then not long after, a major earthquake struck Tibet. Coincidence or something else? In ancient China, the appearance of 7 suns was seen as a sign of cosmic disorder, of heaven reacting to human arrogance, of great change to come. And they weren't alone. In Japan, strange snake-shaped clouds have been observed just before major disasters, twisting high above the mountains, coiling and shimmering like living beings. The Ainu people believed such clouds carried messages from the gods, warnings, reminders, portents. Even in Europe, accounts from the Middle Ages speak of fiery crosses in the sky before plagues or earthquakes, of sudden silences in the wind, of animals crying out, of the world pausing just for a moment before breaking apart. In modern times, these stories are often dismissed: mass hallucination, weather optics, overactive imagination. But here's the unsettling part. The more we collect satellite data, the more we map electromagnetic fields, the more we listen to infrasound and low-frequency noise, the more we realize that the planet may emit signals before disaster. We just haven't learned how to read them yet. Some researchers now suggest that tectonic stress may trigger temporary atmospheric anomalies, that friction in rocks can ionize the air, that electric fields may extend miles above the Earth into the sky, and under the right conditions, these fields become visible. What ancient people saw as omens could be signs of energy released across dimensions we barely understand. But there's another layer to this: prophecy. From Baba Vanga to Nostradamus, from Hopi legends to biblical visions, many ancient prophecies speak of the earth opening, fire from the sea, or a sky that burns with no sun. Some predict that when natural disasters begin to echo one another, flood after quake, storm after fire, it is not just climate chaos. It is a shift of time, of balance, of fate. Are we reaching that point? Is the earth warning us? Are the skies reflecting the tremors beneath? Or are we simply waking up to truths that have always been there? In the final chapter, we return to the biggest question of all. What does it mean when the earth speaks? And what happens to humanity if we keep refusing to listen? We used to think the earth was stable, solid ground, a foundation we could trust, but now we know better.